Today we're going to give you a behind the scenes look of the HTML block and show you the secret life that it leads that in fact most people don't even know about. First of all, let's just take a look at our standard HTML block usage, something I think that almost everybody is pretty familiar with. So here we have an organization page with an HTML block on it. And of course we can go into edit mode. And I think we'd all agree that we're pretty familiar with the basic usage where you can edit the text and it'll show up on the page. But we want to go much deeper than that into the realms of this block that very few people understand. But that is quite easy to actually use. The first use case is a lot of the times you're going to be giving people access to this block that you don't maybe necessarily trust that they're going to do the right thing all the time. So for instance, let's say for this page design that you wanted to make sure that you always had this header that said history above and below it. So this takes markup to kind of wrap this content, but you're uncomfortable with the thought that perhaps the person that you're allowing to edit this content may or may not know how to do this and might actually break this. Well, the first thing you can do is, just like any block, you can go into its advanced settings and you can put pre and post HTML. So in this case, we're wrapping kind of the content around this. Now in this case, we're just doing a panel, but don't forget that you could do all kinds of things. You could put this block on a page and there's certain content that only HTML editors for the site, like administrators could look at, and you could then give just a portion of the HTML content to a specific staff person. Of course, you could also achieve somewhat the same thing with multiple HTML blocks secured for different types of authoring, but a lot of cases that might be overkill. Okay, so back to our HTML content block. Again, here we have our panel, and this time we're going to look at another feature. We're going to enable versioning. So what that allows us to do is that we can come back in here and we can start editing this content. And every time we edit it, you'll notice that it creates a new version. So this allows us to kind of go backwards in our version. Maybe we mess something up and we want to get back to its original state. To do that, you can click on the history link and that will bring up a listing of all the different times that it's been edited. And by hitting the select link, you can put that back in as the current version. So that's pretty cool, very helpful, very useful. Another feature that we have is the display from. So this allows us to say, hey, this markup that I'm giving you, this HTML that I'm giving you, I only want you to show it between this date range. And so this is very helpful that when we want to go out there and maybe put a very seasonal type message or a very message that is not like ever fresh. So you want to go out there and put it out there, make an edit, but you don't want to have to remember to come back and change it. So this allows you to give a date range, and then that content would only be available during that date range. And what happens after that date range, it's going to use the version tree and it's going to go back to the most recent version that matches the time frame. So hopefully somewhere in your edit information, you have content that isn't set to expire. So like in this example, version 2, when version 3 is past its expire date, it'll go back to showing version 2. So again, this is a very powerful feature when you're out there, especially on your external websites, and you want to put a brief message, but it only has a certain freshness date, and then it'll roll back to the next version. So behind the scenes, the way the block is working, this is a little bit more on the technical side, is it's going back into the database and it's saying, hey, here's some criteria that I need to get the content for. Obviously here we're going to look at what block it is. So it's block ID 2178. I want version 3 and it has to be between these certain times. And oh, by the way, yeah, it needs to be approved. And that's a feature we're going to talk a little bit about here coming up. And so these are the criteria that it's going back to getting the content. So there's a block involved, there's versioning involved, there's a start and end time involved, and there's also this approval. So you can wire up your block to say, hey, which who's allowed to approve it. And if someone doesn't have access to approve it, they can still make the change. It just won't show. That is the case until an administrator goes into Rock. And if you go into your tools panel, there's this HTML content approval block. And here it'll show you all the HTML blocks that have content that need approval. Now, this is a very underutilized feature within Rock, and we know that because not a lot of people have asked for extra features around this content approval. But it's a very powerful feature in terms of allowing someone to give them the access to go out there and make changes, but then have a site administrator come and approve those changes. So that's right there. So that's some of the power of the HTML block, but you might be saying, hey, but wait, what's the secret life? Like, that stuff seems like stuff I kind of knew about. Maybe I don't use it, but I knew about it. But what's the secret life of the HTML block? And now we're going to get into some of these very powerful features that I don't think very many people know about and that very, very few are using. In fact, it might be that no one's using these. The first one I want to talk about is content linking. Okay, so let's look at a use case here. In our use case, I have two different pages. Okay, so while these pages look somewhat alike, they actually are two separate pages. And so I have a campus menu page, I have some content there, and I have a campus history page, I have some content there. Now, where that blue box is, I want to have some additional content, but you know what? I want the same content on both pages, and I'm worried that if I make two different HTML blocks, man, it's trying to keep those things in sync is going to be really hard, really painful. And I'm not quite sure what to do. So what we can do is we can go into the block settings for the HTML block. So go put two different blocks on those pages. And inside those settings for those, we can link it with a context name. So here I've chosen to have a context name called Campus Shared. Okay, so as soon as I do that, those two blocks are going to become linked in the database. Okay, so whatever content was there before I gave it a context name is going to kind of go away, and they're going to start linking each other together. So in this case, now that I've set it all up, you'll notice that the content between these two blocks are the same. And if I go to this page and edit this content, likewise, this content's automatically going to start showing those new changes. So in a sense, it's the same block, but it's on two different pages. Now, this was really, really important in the early days of Rock because we didn't have a lot of the settings that we do today where a block could be on the same page or could show up on different pages if they're on the same use the same layout or site. But still, there's a lot of value here because maybe you don't have the granularity that you want, but you can create the granularity you want now with that context key. So you just kind of create that text key, and you can have as many of those as you want, and you can stitch together, link together HTML blocks on different pages so that they all show the same content. So that kind of looks like this. So in this case, the block ID goes away. We're not going to look at that. We're just going to look at this context name. Okay, so whatever this key here that I gave in the context name is going to link it, and we're just going to start ignoring the fact that they actually are two separate blocks. So that's pretty powerful, and you can start to link this content all around, and you really only have one set of that content. The next one is an additional context setting, and this one is way more powerful. So let's just say in general that the default context of a page is the page. Okay, so in this case, I have a brief history of campuses. If I don't wire up something, really the context, like what does this content relate to? Well, it relates to the page. But what if we could have several different contexts for the same page? And so in this case, what if the context or content could be tied to something like a specific campus? So let's just say that this is a brief history of campuses, but I wanted the content to change based on a specific campus. Now, there's a couple ways we could do that. One way that we could do it is to put a campus context on the page or a campus setter on the page. So here you'll notice I've put a campus picker, a campus setter on the page. That's a block you can drop on. And so it allows you to kind of pick a campus that you've configured, and then that campus becomes the context of the page. And so here I'm just showing you the settings of this campus context setter. Again, that's a block you can drop on. Has a lot of different settings. There's a context scope, so you can say, hey, once I pick a campus, like that's the campus I want, that context, I want it to follow me around the site. Or you can say, no, it's just for this one page. So don't set it for the whole site, just this one page. And lots of different settings in here. So again, I dropped this context setter on my page, and they have to do a few other things. The first thing I had to do is go into my page properties, and I need to wire up, like, what is the URL query string parameter for that? So in this case, I'm going to say it's campus ID. So if I pass a campus ID in the query string, I want that to kind of set my campus context. Also, in the HTML block on that page, I have to do a couple things. One is I have to pick the context type. So down here, I need to set it to campus. So I want to come down here and say, hey, the entity type is campus. And the context parameter, likewise, that we did on the page, we want to say that the context parameter is campus ID. So this tells the HTML block to do something special. It says, hey, don't just go get any content out of the database. Not for this block, not for the content text, a key that we talked about earlier, but this time I want you to go look at the context of this page, and I want to get content specific to that entity. So let's just keep going here. So here we kind of have our finished page. So notice up here I've actually picked Campus 2 now. And so all of this text here, the history of Campus 2, is in the HTML block, and I got this campus because it's Campus 2 here. And if I were to change this to the main campus, I would then get different text here. And this is all one HTML block, okay? So this is not like an HTML block for each campus. It's like one HTML block, and it says, hey, I'm gonna go get content based on the context that I'm currently set to. So this is campus. So this can be used for campuses, it could be used for groups, it could be used for anything that you can put a context on the page with. And in this case, I'm showing it with a campus picker, but you could actually not have a picker here, and it would read off of the query string in the URL. Now, the original use case for this was much like this for the campus example, and so this was built out so that when you had campus detail pages, you could show information about the campus, but then you could have specific content in the HTML block for that specific campus you're looking at. So this would save you from having to go create specific pages for each and every campus. Instead, they could have one page and share the same HTML block and show different content based on the current campus that was being requested. Okay, so super powerful. Now, if we go back and look at, how does it know how to do all this? So now we're just looking at it's the querying filter key is going to be the campus ID equals 2. And then all the rest applies. Now, as you build out that HTML for this use case, how do you do that? Because at a certain point, you're going to kind of want to know, what is the name of the campus? And you might be tempted, if you look into your Lava and you did Lava debug, you'd see that whenever you have a context on a page, you do have access to that in Lava. And so you might be tempted to write this big if-else statement to show the campus name and which image, to show for that campus. And this is actually what you don't want to do, because you'd have to come update and fix all this every single time you added a campus or changed a campus name. Instead, you want to use HTML more like this. So you'll assign a campus ID, and you can read that campus ID off of the content. So this will be available to you in Lava. And if it read a campus, then you can go get the campus details out of the cache, and then you can put its name and then look at other attributes. And then you can intermix this with other information, like perhaps you wanted to have text about the history of the campus, you could put it here. Now, one could say, well, you could make that a campus attribute if you'd like, and that's true. You could, and for maybe a campus history, that would make sense. But if you had other information that perhaps didn't belong in an attribute, you could use this case. And so when might that be? Well, just remember, you have all the other features of the HTML block. So date ranges and history, like the version history, still work with context. Okay, so like that should blow your mind. So for instance, maybe you have like a message that you want to show out here. And so again, you could use an attribute, but remember with the attributes, you don't get date ranges. You can't say, well, this is the value between these two dates. You could debate whether you could write some lava inside of your attribute to do that, but that would be really kind of hard and likely to break. Out here, we can just put an HTML block and say, hey, this is a message I want to show. You can have a default message, again, for that's evergreen. That's always going to be the case. But then you can change it based on date ranges. And when that date ranges passes, then the next content shows up. You also get versioning. So this is just another a great tool in the toolbox. And understanding the secret powers of the HTML block, I think is going to unlock a lot of capabilities and a lot of new features that you can add to your external website. So hopefully that stuff is, these features are new to you, and hopefully it'll get your mind kind of thinking about different ways that you can use this, both on the internal portal and on the external websites that you're building.